Zack Polanski went on The Rest is Politics with Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart, and I think overall it was a good interview for Zack. He came across well, he stumbled a few times, there was a few bad faith questions from Rory Stewart. Alistair Campbell seemed quite good faith and, on board to an extent, and the comments below the video are really good. They are positive of Zack. I'm not sure it's their audience or Zack's fans coming in the comments, but overall I think it was good. And the left are always going to be held to a higher standard than any Conservative, Labour or Tory MP will be. But we've got to live with that. And I think Zack is a force for good. Let's get straight into the interview because it actually is a good interview.
Question more widely. I think, though, when you start to recognise, again, that a national economy is not like a household budget, you start to get to conversations about spending multipliers. Now, all of this means is that every pound you spend on the economy, you're getting money back. So HMRC would be the first place to start because people go, well, wouldn't people just avoid tax? And I'm like, well, let's make sure we employ people to make sure they don't get away with the loopholes and everyone pays their fair share of tax. Also, the green economy, for every pound you spend on the environmental measures or on net zero, you get £1.88 back. Interestingly, the one place this doesn't work is on defence. So every pound you spend on defence, you're actually getting less money back. We know we've spent £15 billion on nuclear weapons, non-Trident, and when there was a test last year, the weapon didn't even work. It just plopped into the sea. We also know that Donald Trump has the kill button on that weapon, so we don't even truly own it. So I think it's about fundamentally restructuring an economy where, yes, we worry about our national security. It's really important the country is defended, but we don't outsource that to Donald Trump. We work with our European neighbours instead. And more importantly, we actually spend money on healthcare, on education.
You haven't told me what you would do standing up at the dispatch box as a Green Party Chancellor now. How would you create this entirely new system without unplugging yourself from Europe, which you believe in and support, and from a global economy, which, whether we like it or not, exists?
Well, we have a sovereign currency.
I mean, that is a good question, and it is an important question. That is the ultimate question. But what Zack is doing is questioning the orthodoxy of neoclassical economics, which has been the dominant economics of the last 40 years, that says that the market is rational, that people optimize their buying capacity to the highest degree, and that somehow, the market almost, we don't have a laissez-faire system, but almost like the market can deal with these things. Whereas we've seen since 2008, with increasing inequality and poverty and societal instability, that it's not working anymore. And that's where Zack is correct. We need to change the system. And this is where, okay, you're asking a lot of Zack Polanski just to say, right, single-handedly, I'm going to change the economic paradigm of some of the most powerful people and interests that have ever existed. The fossil fuel companies, the banks, the financial sector, the, political establishment, that's the newspapers, Westminster. I mean, he's one man. He's not going to do it alone. It's a broader conversation about people since 2008 have been worse off. We need to change the economic paradigm. And we need to have this conversation. Not just immigration, not just culture wars. This is the conversation we should have been having for the last 30 years. The left have been having this conversation, but amongst themselves in a way.
In this country, so we can still work with Europe and we should rejoin the customs union immediately. It's absolutely outrageous that we're not, but we would still be in charge of our own finances. And so it's about investing in our communities, and it really is as simple as that. And that hasn't been done for a long time because of this metaphor that we have a budget deficit. But actually, when we're talking about a deficit, what we're really saying that is a deficit to the Bank of England is money in our public services. And actually, if we have a surplus, that's a deficit to our public services. And this can sound truly radical to someone if they've always kind of just heard the one idea of how our economy works. But actually, this came from Thatcher, it came from neoliberalism. And then the BBC, maybe a few years ago, started to challenge it. They started to say, let's have a conversation about deficits and debts and what they truly mean. And they were doing some pretty good work. And then they went very quiet. And then now they are absolutely reinforcing that old myth. And that myth is so broken. I had a debate earlier this week with Jeremy Hunt. And I was just really aware of, we're just operating in a completely different paradigm frame. So the question...
Hold on, but on the paradigm frame, so let's say you're doing the budget, you're also doing a King's Speech, because you have to operate within the system that we have, okay,
Sure.
to change it. What pieces of legislation do you have to bring forward in a King's speech to make, so like we did the Bank of England independence in our first King's speech. What's the scale of change that we're talking about, and how do you bring that about? It's easy to say, well, we ought to win support for it, but then you've got to make the change in legislation
for sure.
well.
And then
what are you going to legislate for? What are the specific changes you make to the way our economy is run, to the way our system works, that will allow you then to say this is the world that we're trying to create?
Well, what I'm saying now doesn't require a whole lot of legislation. We can get to legislation. The first thing we need to do is abolish these nonsense fiscal rules. The only fiscal rule we should have is the rate of
I mean, to an extent, but you have to regulate the banks, the financial sector, and all the chicanery and complex financial derivatives, hedge funds that kind of have just gone wild and are complex. And this is why it's hard to have a conversation about economics, because it is deeply complex. And we'll see in a little bit that it's hard to have the conversation because these systems have been made purposely complex. And really, the key lesson we need to learn is that economics isn't a science like the hard science. It's not like physics or biology. It's more soft science. It's more like psychology. And there's different theories of psychology. There's the Freudian tradition, there's psychiatry, there's Jacques Lacan, French continental tradition. And with economics, there's the left wing tradition that Zach is talking about. You obviously Karl Marx, you Keynes, and you have neoclassical. And the point that I think Zach needs to be emphasizing is that economics is political argument. You have to create an argument, and the status quo isn't working. We've seen that with austerity. The Tories have decimated our economy, and Labour are continuing the same paradigm. So we have to go, okay, what is the economy? Who does it benefit? And how do we restructure it in a democratic way? Because this undermines democracy. The fact that we're so beholden to the stock markets, bonds, and a select few people who control the financial, in London, New York. We're talking about a few thousand people. This is massively anti-democratic. It's unpatriotic, and it's creating societal instability.
inflation should be watched as much as you have physical resources in your space.
So that we can borrow more.
Well, we don't even need to borrow more because we have a sovereign currency. So ultimately,
we can print more.
Well, you talk about printing more, but actually what we're saying there is investing more. So creating the money that we're going to get back. It is a false economy to underinvest in our national health service, because what we do is we get a sick population, which is exactly what we've had. We saw this during...
This is the question. You've had 14 years of austerity, which has killed over 300,000 people. You've doubled the debt. They've increased the deficit year on year and devalued the pound with Brexit and the instability, lack of growth over the last 20 years. The only growth we've had is from immigration, and now we're, seemingly turning our back on that. So we're only going to be worse off. Where's the realism here? We need pragmatism. Again, this sounds extreme. Invest in your own country. Why? This should not be extreme. And I don't think it is for most people. Like most people, they go, actually, yeah, we should invest in our country. Yes, we're paying back massive debt through quantitative easing. That bailed out the banks, by the way. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't invest in our futures.
COVID. I know today you've been discussing the COVID inquiry. We didn't put the measures in place. We didn't invest, and our economy has badly been hit as a result. Ultimately, investing is bringing that money back into the economy. And the reason why this can sound controversial is because we have had politicians for decades now that have had a big systemic change of moving public money to private wealth. To come back to your question, Rory, to fund corporations and ultimately to say to their lucrative contracts and people they know. We saw this with the PPE scandal, but it's not just PPE. It's happening every day. It's happening with the hotels with migrants, where money is being put into private companies, rather than saying, what is the role of the state? We saw this with the Attlee government. We saw this with this mass investment to actually go, let's have the state intervention here where we actually care for people, we have compassion towards people, and government take responsibility for the lives of people. And by the way, that's brilliant for the economy. Every time that's been done, it's...
Yeah, because we did it for the fucking banks, didn't we, in 2007 and 20? No question about that, bailing the banks. No question of pumping trillions of pounds into the wealthiest pockets and purses in the land through quantitative easing. No question. No question. But when it's actually helping people, average people, working people, it's like, oh, no. Oh, no. Sorry. More austerity for you, more public cuts, higher taxes, and that's all we can do. That's the reality. That's the reality. That's the economic reality we live in. Really?
Great. And the last thing I'd say, because it's your question really about printing money, is we're really talking about debt to GDP ratio there. Japan has a 270% debt to GDP ratio. They have significantly better living standards than we do. These are all awful measures. GDP,
but
even the guy who designed the idea of GDP says this is a terrible way to measure the health of an economy.
What's the central fundamental difference between Japanese debt and British debt? What is the fundamental difference?
Well, the big point is that we have our own sovereign currency.
The fundamental difference, so do the Japanese, but what's the fundamental difference between why Japan can do that and Britain can't?
I'm waiting for you to tell me.
Well, fundamentally, because the Japanese are borrowing from themselves. Right? There's a huge amount of savings and investment remaining internal to Japanese markets. How much are we paying every year on debt interest?
So here's the question. Borrowing,
how much are we spending every year on debt interest?
Well, we don't need to, do we?
How much are we spending
Borrowing
every
from
year?
yourself.
No,
so
Zach,
who are you
Zach,
borrowing
Zach,
from?
I'm just trying to work out how good you are on the numbers. How much are we spending?
Okay, but why are we borrowing that or paying back 100 billion on debt? Because your government, the incompetency of your government and the current framework. That's where Zach should have gone. And he will learn from this. And, he will. But why are we paying so much debt? That's the question he should have asked. Okay, why are we paying that debt? Because, he wouldn't want to answer that question.
Every year on debt interest.
But so actually, of all people, Richard Tice has been saying the same thing. During COVID, we gave loans to the Bank of England.
You can't give me a rough figure on how much we're spending on debt interest every year?
There's £70 billion that we owe to the Bank of England, but we don't actually owe that money.
You mean the debt or the deficit?
The debt.
Okay, the debt is
the deficit, sorry.
Okay, we are spending £100 billion
Yes.
annually on debt interest, right?
Is it 11% of everything?
Debt interest, huge amount of money.
Right.
So one of the
Yes, because of quantitative easing and the doubling of the debt. I mean, the Bank of England has been around for 330 years. Up until 2010, the debt was at about 1 trillion. The Tory party doubled that in 14 years. And okay, yes, they had, the 2008 crash. They had COVID. But even before COVID, the debt was massive. And they're the reasons. Austerity is the reason why we're paying back so much debt. So how the fuck is Rory Stewart saying, who the fuck is he to say? And also to lecture people on the economy from Rory Stewart, who had a hand in austerity, he was part of the government, is kind of lacks a bit of self-awareness, I think.
things I suppose I'm getting at.
No, but what I'm getting straight back at you is we don't need to spend that money. So that money has been created as an idea. We're spending that money straight back to ourselves.
This is my point about the change. Is that we do need to spend that money now because that is how we borrow the money from the markets to fund the things that we're funding. And so one of the reasons why, and I know you're not happy with the sort of economic performance and the performance more generally of the Labour government, one of the reasons why they do have to be conscious of the market reaction to something like a budget is because if they get it wrong, the markets lose confidence and the costs of borrowing then go further and we end up spending even more. So that's why I keep saying, how do you get from A to B?
Well, and so now we're really getting to the root of the question. I think it comes to all of what Rory was just saying, because I think we're operating in different paradigms. I don't think the market should be dictating democratic decisions. I think the people we elect and governments and fundamentally the public
are the people who should be making the decisions.
Yeah, and that's why you need to regulate these people who control it. The banks, the financial services, they need to be regulated. They need to have caps and bonuses. Certain, derivatives and things should just be made illegal. And we need to crack down. That's what should have happened after 2008. You've had your fun. Now you need to take responsibility. But is that going to happen? Probably not. Because to them, it's just, that's just how the system works, isn't it? We're beholden. We have to have our budget beholden and our public spending beholden to the bond market.
if you get elected and you're one of the members of the House of Commons that can make these changes, what are the changes that you're going to have to make that actually take us out of that system? Because my sense is that it's a lot harder than you think.
Oh, it's definitely, I mean, it's not harder than I think. I know it's hard. I know none of this is easy, but I didn't get into politics to do the easy things. What I would flip the question round, because sometimes people have the tone of voice that sounds like, oh, this is ludicrous and so radical. What's radical is what we've got right now, which is trickle-down economics, which has been proven to fail
I don't disagree on that.
and over again. And so we need a different system. I'm not an economist.
I mean, Alistair Campbell seems pretty sympathetic. So is he saying that we can do nothing? Is there no policies? Is there no infrastructure we can build that challenges? And again, in some ways, it'd have to be global. Businesses would just move. It is a big challenge. The paradigm shift from neoclassical to a more Keynesian model or, left-wing economic model is huge. But we have to have the conversation. And, we are at least having the conversation now.
I'm not going to pretend to be an economist. What I am, though, is someone who listens to brilliant economists and a whole range of economists and listens to ideas from around the world. And what I know is that our system is broken. It's not working for anyone. Sorry, it's not working for anyone. It's working for multimillionaires and billionaires who are telling the story about our system.
So, rather than getting into maybe an argument about this,
it's fine. You told me like 20 minutes ago that I wasn't radical enough.
Yeah. Tell us which economists you're listening to. Who are your intellectual influences here?
Brilliant people. So Grace Blakely, Richard Murphy, who's been doing a lot of work on this, Gary Stevenson, who I know you've had on recently, James Medway, lots of different economists. So a lot of the time it's just reading the stuff that they're talking about. And I think there is a consensus that the neoliberal model has broken and it's not worked.
Consensus where? From people like Gary Stevenson, or where's the consensus? Where's the academic consensus here?
I think the academic consensus is among economists who aren't working for the government. I think they're all looking at government decisions.
You see Gary Stevenson as a sort of pseudo-academic economist, or a...
No, he mentioned Gary Stevenson along with Grace Blakely, Richard Murphy, and James Medway, who are all academics. James Medway works at universities. Richard Murphy works at a university. Grace Blakely hasn't. I'm sure she could if she would. She's written 3 books. Highly, informed economist. Like there's Ha-Jun Chang, who was also a friend of Gary Stevenson. There's Joseph Stiglitz. There's Yanis Varoufakis. There are plenty of left-wing economists that share this view that this neoclassical paradigm is broken. He's just being dishonest here. He's trying to do it like a gotcha. Like, there's not consensus because, believe it or not, there's a lot of people who are paid very well to big up the status quo. But I think this is where Rory Stewart gets into realms of bad faith.
I don't think he's pseudo-academic. I think he's literally an economist. That's his job.
What about, you mentioned...
it's not his job. He's a city trader. He studied an undergraduate degree in economics.
Right.
Okay, he's not a professional economist.
But I think...
Okay, and you are? I mean, he's got a master's in economics, I think. You have an undergraduate degree. Yes, you teach. See, this is the elitism and the classism you see. And Gary spoke about this on his podcast with Jimmy the Giant. He felt that he wasn't being taken seriously by Rory Stewart because of his class, because of his accent, because of his background. And the fact that even though he went to LSE, one of the best universities in the world, has a master's and is an intelligent guy who is identifying the issues. We need to tax wealth, redistribute wealth, and challenge the economic status quo. It's like, oh, he's a pseudo-intellectual. Is that projection, I think? Rory Stewart, to be honest?
If you do a degree in economics, it's fair to say you're an economist.
Where are the people with graduate level degrees in economics that you're focusing on here? Where are the...
What's that mean? Graduate level? He just said, Richard Murphy, Grace Blakely, James Medway, who has written books as well, also teaches. I mean, come on. He just listed them. This is so bad faith. Engage with what he's saying. You're acting like, oh, there's no left-wing economists out there. Richard Wolff. I mean, even, you could say, argue Slavoj Žižek. I mean, David Harvey, sorry, who's a big Marxist guy, who's written a lot on neoliberalism. I mean, there's a lot of guys out there, and women.
Where are the professors? Where are the people for whom this is their academic speciality?
So this underlines some of our conversation
Okay, so that is bad faith, because he has just said, that's so ridiculously bad faith. He has just said,
too. We're not in government right now. When you're in government, you have an entire civil service to go, here are our principles. Here's how we get to the exact questions that Alistair's fairly asking me about what does the legislation look like and how do you make this happen? I think the point to do right now is to get the principles. Can I highlight something that I think is interesting? So I did a debate the other night with BBC. I came off stage and a woman came over to me. And it's a story I'm hearing lots. It was lovely. She said, my 4 kids are so happy with what you're saying. You're giving them hope again. They're feeling really excited. And I said to her, that's your kids. What about you? And she was like, I think you're brilliant. I think you speak with compassion and values, but I'm not convinced yet that what you say is doable. And what I need to see is the practical shift of how to make those things happen. And it's a criticism or a challenge I totally accept. That absolutely needs to happen. People need to be able to ask questions, and there's more and more detail about what happens. But that happens once you've established the principles. And I feel like this is what Gary was saying to you too. Once you've established the principle that there's deep inequality, that a lot of this is because multimillionaires and billionaires are hoarding wealth, then what you do about it is an open question. Yeah. But let's establish the principle first.
Well, my final sort of contribution is what I feel is that story that you told about somebody who was Jewish and had done theatre performances about Israel.
Okay, so just ignore what he says there about the principle of inequality, which is tearing society apart. This is why we're seeing the resurgence of the far right. We saw it in the 1930s after the 29 crash, massive unemployment, poverty, inequality, and then you get the rise of fascism, Mussolini, Franco, Hitler, the devastation of World War II, tens of millions dead, and then we go, okay, maybe we create the NHS, maybe we invest in our country after the devastation of war. And then for 30 years, from the 50s, 60s, 70s, you have the oil shocks, and then you have massive inflation, and then that's when they bring in neoliberalism. The public spending, debt, not sustainable, high taxes, not debt. They cut down massive taxes in the 80s, emasculate unions, deregulate the banks. And over the last 40 years, you've seen consolidation of wealth and power at the top, where people can't afford housing. They're struggling with mental health issues, which is tied to capitalism and the lack of community and isolation and atomization. You're just a consumer. That's all you do. You get up, you go to work, you consume, and you die. That's why people are fucking depressed. And you've got this twat, frankly, who's like, well, he goes on to say, well, your journey about, being a Jew is very interesting, but you seem like you've not studied economics. No, he knows. This is a form of gaslighting. Zack Polanski knows very well that inequality is the biggest driving force of instability in society. We know this from sociologists. We know this from economists, historians. We're living in an unprecedented time of inequality where people are literally struggling to heat their own homes, where you've got 50 families that have the same wealth as the bottom half of the population in the UK of like 35 million people. This isn't right. People know it's not right. And luckily, the comments below, people are recognizing that actually, yeah, he doesn't know, all the details of the economy. I mean, who does? He's not an economist. He says that. I'm not an economist. But he knows that we need to change the paradigm because people are going to get wealthier at the top. People at the bottom are going to get poorer. And you're just going to see a Nigel Farage government. You are. You're going to see a Nigel Farage government. And when that doesn't work out, what do you get next? Something worse, where you potentially do see some really dark things happening. So on that note, I'm really upset with this. I think Zack did great, but it's just, this is what we're up against essentially. So tell me your thoughts below, and I'll see you in the next video.